Welcome to the Syncretism Society Virtual Academy. Today we are going to be diving into the mysteries of the Red Sea and how your blood is the Red Sea. We're going to read from the book The Red Sea is Your Blood, The New Enlightenment by Alvin Boyd Kuhn, and understand a little bit more about allegory. Now, allegory is a manifestation of the eternal archetypes and eternal personal intelligences that are on manifest. So the allegories use characters, places, symbols, and different circumstances that characters are put through to symbolize things that are invisible, things that are not comprehensible 100% by the intellect itself. We have to use the right brain or the intuitive faculties to thoroughly digest and understand the reason behind allegories and why the scriptures and ancient texts are written in the way they are. They speak to the higher part of us. They are not to stimulate any type of intellectual argument of where something took place historically or whether or not this person or prophet at a particular time, what grocery store did they use? What did they what particular did they do from their day-to-day habits? Like, for example, what did Moses or any of these characters, Joseph, what do they do when they're not on script, when they're not on theater? Does it even matter what tea they drank or what exactly they did on their free time? People are still trying to figure out what exactly some of these ancient allegorical characters did on their free time when that is fundamentally not the point. So we all know that these scriptures are fearfully and wonderfully made, but that's not to mean that, we just intellectually invented them. The scriptures are timeless truth that come from the higher dimensions and trickle down to the physical realm. Our ability to grasp the eternal truths are awakened, and we're able to perceive and write down these things that the seers or the prophets or the ancient seers, the ancient Brahmins, the ones that were on the supreme path of self-development. This is what they saw in the transcendental planes of existence, and were able to crystallize into form eternal truths. So we're thinking about things like, for example, Moses freeing the Israelites from bondage, or Jesus walking on water or stilling the storm. Now, historically, that would be a miracle. That would be just simply amazing if that took place. But if you really think about it, it's highly unlikely that something like that would happen. So we have to look within and think, what does it mean to truly walk upon the waters of life, the waters of the emotional nature? Now, the emotional nature and human life in and of itself is all chemical. It's all based on chemistry. A lot of our feelings and emotions and motives that we have are all chemical and harmonial coming from harmony between the sun and the moon. So the Red Sea that we have to cross is the human body. As we can see, the red blood within the human body. The soul has to take place in a human form for a particular amount of time to gain the proper lessons of good and evil and knowledge of itself as opposed to what it's not, to be able to cross the Red Sea. Now, once we cross the Red Sea and we part the Red Sea and actually cross it, that's when we are able to understand our spiritual nature and our human emotional nature, and we split them, we cross through them. The egos are disengaged by the flood, and all the entities essentially are perished. The egos are the lower aspects of the consciousness. So I'm going to read from a little bit about Alvin Boyd Kuhn. Red Sea is your blood. Now, he included the principle that the tombs of sacred writings bequeathed to early humanity by the gods or by men of far advanced evolutionary stature were susceptible of interpretation at 4 different levels of understanding. So these are there's 7, but these are the 4 main. The literal physical. So this is exactly like the literal physical is like, Joseph and Mary went to pay taxes. They went, all the firstborns were told to be killed. The baby was born, he was hidden, corrupt government at the time, very literal, historical. It gives us, that's just the foundation. It gives the left brain, the logical mind, something to grasp, something to hold, something to see. So when Jesus is like, give unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, he's talking about give unto the human nature what needs to be given on, no more, no less. But on a literal level, we can see it as paying taxes, and understand how Caesar plays that part of like more of the materialistic aspect, not the spiritual, right? Because Caesar would obviously be allegorically the material aspect. And we can see someone like Joseph with, the just man, the carpenter, the one that was able to have the Son of God. Of course, they're going to make him literally historically sound very morally perfect, very high level. So these characters are supposed to bring an emotion or a feeling to them so that we can better understand what the spiritual meaning of the story is trying to educate us about. So number 2 is the moral sentimental story. So that's like the basic fill of it. So like Abraham just wanted, Abraham was just being tested by God. He just wanted to see if he had enough faith to kill his own son, even though he wouldn't, just to prove himself. The sentimental moral is like, oh, have faith in God, even when the physical nature doesn't seem to abide by it, or when intuition kind of overrides reason. But essentially, or in this case, when reason overrides intuition. But essentially, the moral sentimental is like the main story that like they can put in a kid's show, for example. Like they make all the Bible stories and all the Krishna stories and all the hero stories. You can make a very simple kid story that has a moral sentiment in it. All the stories have a moral sentiment. So we have the literal physical, then we have the moral sentimental. Then the allegorical intellectual. That's basically talking about the psychology of it. What is the psychology of, the Israelites being freed from bondage of the lower, being bondage of Egypt? And then Moses comes and saves them, and they go through the wilderness 40 nights, 40 days, and finally Mount Sinai, he's able to be instructed the 10 commandments. So of course, on an allegorical intellectual level, we can understand and perceive, the biochemistry of the body and how it relates to the chrism rising up to the brain, and how the energies in bondage to the lower chakras. We can understand that, from a very intellectual level. Finally, the anagogical or mystical, that is, the book of Holy Writ could be read as a historical event, as a moral instruction, as an intellectual conception of truth, as the incitement to the most exalted spiritual mystical transports. So that means the story of Moses and being found in the river, on one level, the historical physical would be like, oh, they found Moses, unwrapped him, and he became, he learned under the pharaohs of Egypt. That's literal. But anagogical, the story of Moses is the story of the soul incarnating into matter. And crossing the Red Sea would be the soul transforming and traveling along the journey, the human journey. Even before Philo's day, the great and learned Jewish scholars and interpreters of the Torah, the Tanaim and the Amoraim, had expounded the principle that he who reads the scriptures only at the level of their surface meaning will never grasp the truth of living word of God. That only he who pierces the coarser veils to grasp a far deeper sense and experience a more vivid illumination of consciousness will receive the cataract purification of content with the surface meaning of the words was a fool. They went so far as to say that he who was content with the surface meaning of the words was a fool and a simpleton. As long as religious cling to the lower rungs of the scale of interpretation of their scriptures, there will be endless points of difference between them. Even if they will lift the sense to the upper third and fourth levels, the apparent outer grounds of difference will dissolve in the unity and harmony of a lofty conceptual enlightenment. He is basically saying that if all the religions came to understand the allegorical and intellectual, as well as the anagogical mystical, the 3 and 4 levels, that would be enough to end all the religious confusion. And that's what happens when we're, as syncretists, we're finally able to overcome, just interpreting Santa Claus as literal. It's better to understand the Christic story within, as well as the emotional fifth dimensional. It's not to say that this universe is dry and there's no higher beings with intelligences. There's intelligences that represent the Christ. There's intelligences that represent Mercury or Joseph, Saturn, Joseph spirits from Saturn. We have Moses, spirits from Archangel Moses, the willpower. Not that he's an archangel, but he's an eternal archetype, an eternal being, an intelligence. We call it Moses. Another culture could call it something else or someone else. And Moses is incarnate when great men incarnate into the physical plane with great willpower and liberate human beings from bondage. So anyone who helps liberate someone from bondage is considered a Moses. Anyone who puts together great sacrifice for humanity is considered a solar being. It's just to understand that these happen on an anagogical level and they apply to everyone at the same time and are timeless. So they didn't happen at a particular time or date, but are happening and occurring right now within the sine wave. He goes on to explain fire on heaven's hearth. He explains that the higher fire, the fiery power of the creative God, that fire from the three top Sephiroth of the tree of life, Kether, Chokmah, and Binah, that fiery principle descends into the waters below. When that fire descends into the waters, it creates torus fields and creates beings. These beings are the individual entities. In the same way, the energy from our brain descends, the fire descends into the water of the lower chakras and ignites the fire, gives life to the sexual energy or the water, the mem. And out of that water, Moses is drawn out and up into the spinal canal. It's all about the ascension, but it's also happening on an allegorical level outside of us, anagogically, physically, mystically. It takes a lot of willpower of Moses to be able to rise the chrism up a vertebrae. Depending on how much karma we've occurred and how much we've descended, it can be very hard to reascend. So if we're enslaved in the physical bondage of Egypt, we have to ignite our willpower of Moses within ourselves to cross the Red Sea. The Red Sea being the human body itself, the red blood. The blood is made up of mostly comparable to saline or salt water. Hence, the allegory is very specific, very spiritual in nature. This journey across the Red Sea, where you have lots of trials and tribulations, and lots of successes as well as we triumph over the trials and tribulations of life. So let's talk about how to increase our willpower. Willpower is increased by utilizing thought, emotion, and action. To have a thought, to have an emotion, and to actually act on it. A lot of the times we become lazy and we just sit in our thoughts and we think about a lot of different things and we never really put any emotion into it. Or we put a lot of emotion into different things, circumstances, relationships, events in our life, but we don't take a lot of time to mentally put through with it. The other variation is that we think a lot, we feel a lot, but we don't act on it. So the whole point of building willpower is to set up routines where you think, feel, and do. For example, conceptualize yourself doing an exercise, feel how it would feel to have completed the exercise, and then do it. Once you do it, the willpower will be added to you. Every time you abstain from the animal spasm or the expulsion of the sexual energies, and we're not talking about just internal, ejaculating, we're talking about reserving the energies, keeping the fire within. This is increasing the willpower and eliminating past karma from the body's nervous system, so we can purify the nervous system in that way. Various different ways to increase our willpower, the Moses aspect that will give us enough willpower to cross the Red Sea of life includes exercises that, doing things that we wouldn't normally want to do. For example, if you're used to the cold, if you're used to being warm all the time, go outside in the cold, just literally go outside super cold. Or if you're used to, sleeping until 10, wake up at 7. If you're used to taking super warm, hot showers, take a cool shower. Get out of the routine. Sit and meditate for at least 10 minutes. Don't get up and move. Do the exercises that I try to facilitate here. For example, sitting still in stillness for up to 20 minutes without moving. Every time you move, make a check mark in your notebook after you're done to be like, I moved like 4 times. Remember, the object is not to focus on your breathing, your breath, or your cycles, but to simply remain still. This will increase the willpower aspect. Another thing is to meditate on our defects and our bondage, really look within ourselves and say, hey, you know what? Is this addiction really giving me energy? How often am I willing to be a slave to Egypt and in bondage to this particular aggregate or aspect of myself that's causing problems? We're able to dive into it and change it and transmute it and liberate the energy by starting to feel a bit of like remorse and a little bit of anger. We have to utilize the power of Mars, which is Moses, to ignite a certain amount of anger and remorse within ourselves to create change. If we're always 100% satisfied with ourselves from moment to moment, no matter how poorly we did with our goals or what we're doing with our mind or emotions or actions, then we'll be so content that we'll never be moved to change. Moses is the internal archetype within that moves us to change. And we're talking so much about Moses because we're focusing on the first book of the Bible, which is Genesis, before we move on to the mystical interpretations of the other books. So I would definitely recommend understanding the truths about allegories and how it applies to us on an internal level, and understanding how to activate this fiery nature of the spirit we call Moses, or the fire. The fiery nature of spirit is indicated in the symbolism of the figure of incense in the censer, the latter being the miniature stove in which the heavenly fire gave off its pleasing incense for God's delectation. The censer, as a vessel which could contain and transport the fire of soul to earth, must refer to what St. Paul calls our spiritual body. Within man's outer physical body, all regions of the arcane wisdom asserted that he has several finer bodies of sublimated essence, still in a sense material, but not of the gross material matter familiar to our senses. So we have these subtle bodies that are made up of subtle or more subtle matter, like the astral body, the ether body. These bodies are nourished by preserving the chrism. This chemical chrism, rises up into the brain and ignites the pineal gland and produces the proper nourishment for these finer bodies. A lot of the times we lose out on a lot of our inner qualities and inner contentment and our inner mobility to move about freely as a spirit because we've degenerated the powers of these bodies through our vices. So, and when we talk about vices, we're not just talking about like lust. We're also talking about jealousy, envy, to be envious of what others have, to be yearning for what someone else wants, whether that be a position, an item, an occupation. So we could focus on each vice at a time. We don't always have to look at, the main ones as human nature would be lust, but we also have to look at ourselves like, when are we being unreasonable? When are we being short-tempered? When can we take some time to chill, relax, meditate, focus, and look at ourselves objectively, and take some time to write down certain defects that are really getting in the way? Now, it's really important to write them down in a journal, preferably, I would say, well, any color is fine, but just a journal that basically is designated for your defects. And in this journal, you're going to write the negative aspects of yourself. So on the first page, you'll say, I am sloth, and then assign it an element like earth. The next one, you could say, I'm always melancholy, and assign it water, to be like, hey, I'm always thinking about the past, always melancholy, feeling emotions and nostalgic. This could be something that is overtaking. So you'd want to correct that with, that being a water, you'd want to put that in the book. Everything you put in the book that's a defect, your conscious mind will take a note, and your subconscious mind will understand that this book is where all your defects are going, so that this book with all the defects, your subconscious mind knows that there are things that you want to get rid of. So this book will become a book of whatever you write in it, your internal aspect will slowly disappear. And then after we do this for a week, we will start doing the book of your benefits, the positives. And this book will be an increasing book. So we'll learn how to make a sigil on one of the books. A sigil is a symbol and we will learn about sigils and how to, use them correctly for self-improvement. So we can use a sigil on one book to say, hey, this is the book of defects and bad habits. And then we'll have another book and put a sigil on it and be, this is the book for good habits. And this one will increase. We'll put the sigil for decreasing the bad habits and negative aspects, and the sigil for increasing the positive habits. Now, please message me, reach out with any questions. I could definitely help direct you in making the books. So these spiritual bodies the sublimated essence, still in a sense material, but not of the gross physical matter familiar to our senses. Science now knows of the existence of matter in many ethereal spiritual forms, impalpable and invisible, yet quite literally real. And these inner bodies hold or convey the central nucleus of the soul when the outer physical body is thrown off or not yet assumed. The intimation of the text of Revelation then is that the angel, the power of God, having picked the soul in a finer spiritual body, whisks it off the altar and transports it down to earth. Then 2 verses later in that 8th chapter of Revelation, the text says that the 7 angels, which is the creative life energy that is always projected forth from the hearth, the altar of God's fire in the 7 impulsions, prepared themselves to sound. And the first angel sounded, and there followed hell and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. Here's the first mention of the divine fire's connection with blood. But once these sparks or units of the fiery mind essences were ensconced in the bodies of animal creatures here on earth, they became in a very real sense the fiery power of the body's blood, the generator of the electric dynamism found in the blood. For in the blood is the life of the soul, says the scriptures. Drain out a person's blood and the spark of fire, the dynamo of his life, is gone. The fire has gone out of his hearth. But then in the next 8th verse comes the crowning statement of the truth we are unitiating. And the second angel sounded, and it was a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood. Hence another allegory pointing to the Red Sea. The Red Sea can't stay out of any of the books because all the books have the same story. Jesus turning water to wine. It's another red blood, Red Sea, physical body, transmutation of the lungs and the oxygen into the blood. So the Christ is a conscious being that's activated. It's the highest power, this personal aspect of deity, or the Son of God, or the emanation of God. And that aspect manifests and upholds the entire universe. Krishna, he's the ruler of all things. He has his eternal abode individually and personally. He has his everlasting and personal omnipotent presence, which is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Then he has his individual witness aspects that are within all beings. These are the 3 aspects of the creator. And this is why we can see all of these similarities and all of these beautiful scriptures and understand them in an alchemical level. It's not to say that, the scriptures are just made up stories. They're just allegories made up by men. No, they're divinely inspired and eternal truths that we are finally able to grasp. As Alva Boyd Kuhn said, the fiery impulses of the spirit descended into the physical earth and was turned into, basically encapsulated into animals or tombs or wombs. The matter of the animal bodies stupefied our senses of the soul. Now, this is the mysteries of Sagittarius, being the Minotaur, the half man, the half beast, the bridge between both worlds. This human experience is our ability to transverse this realm and to cross the Red Sea into our everlasting, eternal, divine nature. Not all of us necessarily want to reincarnate again as a physical flesh suit. And according to Thomas H. Burgoyne, that could be up for debate. So we have to see exactly, we have to go within to understand the truth and really get an out-of-body experience to really be able to get to a point where we can know for sure where we're going and where we came from, rather than speculating. And that could take a lot of meditation. It could take a lot of, a lot of practices and rituals, but it also could just take by identifying with the witness, identifying with the true being. As Ken Willard talks, the eternal true self. That self is Bhagavan Krishna, or Christ, the Christos, the Father within. And when we commune with it by meditation, we increase our willpower, our understanding, and we remove all regret, all doubt. And we are able to live life intelligently, like these characters would in the story, as they all relate to the higher mind. The scriptures speak figuratively of the power of God as rebuking the sea and smiting the sea, confounding the sea. This depicts the spirit's power to check, change, and ultimately destroy the force of the lower motivations of the flesh, the old man of the sea. Doubtless, this is the origin of the poetic phrase, to suffer a sea change. Translated into terms of modern psychology, this typism would have relevance to the function of the superconscious power of the great unconscious in man to check, control, and direct the energies of the conscious part of his psychism. So, wow, this is very interesting. He's saying to use the relevance of the function of the superconscious power of the great unconscious in. So our inner indwelling, the inner father within, the abode. I guess he's kind of claiming that to be the great unconscious in man to check and control and direct the energies of the conscious part of his psyche. So we use the unconscious aspect by impregnating it with good ideals, good values, and positive inputs to get great positive outputs and to direct the conscious ego out of bondage, cross the Red Sea, to transmute the water into wine, to succeed. Well, shouldn't use that. I would say to triumph over life circumstances. So it says, for a long time, the watery elements of the consciousness, sense and emotion, or earth and water, predominate and rule the individual's life. But gradually and all too slowly, the pure and more powerful flames of reason and love gain the ascendancy. Inevitably, in the end of the more powerful elements must win out. And this at once introduces the great symbolism of fire drying up the water. And here we have the grounds of all the allegories of the God power drying up the waters of the sea or river in order that the sons of God in the Old Testament Israelites may cross over without being drowned. When the sea starts to burn, it will be in the end be dried up. And with this comes one of the most startling revelations of esoteric significance in all the realm of symbolic depiction of truth. This is the secret, guys. The truth as to the conversion of sinful man into man sinless and divine. For as the sinning nature of the first and unredeemed Adam is symbolized by water, and water by nature falls the action upon it by application to it, of the fiery power of the divine soul, which will vaporize it and convert it into a state analogous to a stream or steam, a force in which it too, like fire, shall rise again. What moral lesson could be more cognizant than the realization that if man lives in the realm of base passions, he will continue to fall, but that if he will purge his carnal casualities of their gross selfish character, he will arise. So St. Paul dissents endlessly on the theme that the indulgence of the interests of the flesh means death, whereas the cultivation of the interests of the spirit means life and peace. To descend into and remain bound under the watery nature of the body and its sensual instincts is, in the great theology of the Greeks, a virtual death. To dry out these heavy, sluggish motivations by the superior power of the rational soul is to achieve the resurrection. Wow. So we have to take the fiery impulses of our higher mind. Let's take the fire, Sagittarius, Leo, Aries. We use these three aspects to evaporate the watery nature of ourselves. And by doing this, we dry ourselves up. Not in the way of like, see, we wouldn't lose our fluids or essences. We retain them with the fire and we evaporate them into the mist. And that mist goes up the spinal canal and that mist feeds the internal bodies. So the scriptures and the ancient keys were all trying to show us the path of truth, the path of progression, the path of developing ourselves appropriately. And now we've taught ourselves to completely slow down this process or even completely prevent it. So we can definitely try to take this time on this earth to cultivate as much love as we can, to ignite the fires of the heart through sexual magic, retain the sexual energy, find a partner you love, and practice sexual alchemy with mantra vocalization. Krumheller says the two keys, chastity and mantra vocalization. Mantra vocalization, you could look up the 7 seed mantras in the Eastern tradition or the Samael-Weor mantras. E, E, O, U in the solar plexus, Ah in the thymus, which is here. The prostate and uterus. the sexual organs. So these mantras help to evaporate that energy, to allow the fire to descend and to ignite, not let the fire descend and just act like an animal and to dispose of the energy like we do, but to cultivate it with a sense of purpose and a high ideal so that we can continue to master and to be able to dominate creation in the way the creator wanted us to, and no longer be dominated by the earth and water elements. And we talked on the great work when we fully transmute and evaporate and dry out the water and transmute the earth within us, we get to live freely in the realms of fire and air. And you get to have bodies of fire, air, and ether. We don't have to be bound by earth and water. We will take the spiritual elements that were necessary and they will be transmuted and allow us to have a crystalline form in the fire and air bodies. So nothing to fret, don't let the nihilists get you depressed. Don't let the Scientologists get you depressed. Know that we're on an eternal path of progression and that we have everything we need to find the truth within. As Jesus says, seek the kingdom within. Thank you.